www.northfloridataco.org.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9. Up next, live headlines from NPR News and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, it's the biggest stories of the week. A whistleblower says he was fired for revealing plans to transform state parks. A surge in Republican registrations puts Florida's swing state status in question. Lawmakers consider cracking down on ghost candidates. A controversial Riverside project pits condo owners against developers. And a school shooting in Georgia raises questions about the process for flagging troubled students. We'll talk about all that and more with our all-star panel on our Friday Week in Review. Then, a feminist play about revolution offers a comic take on tragedy and reality. It's all ahead this hour.
In Washington, I'm Corva Coleman. The Georgia student accused of a mass shooting this week at his high school north of Atlanta has appeared in court. He's accused of shooting 2 students and 2 teachers to death with an assault-style weapon. The teenage suspect will remain jailed. His attorney did not seek bail for him. The father of the 14-year-old charged in the shooting is also under arrest. From member station WABE, Melissa Fato reports the father is being charged with multiple counts in connection with the attack.
Colin Gray is being charged with 4 counts of involuntary manslaughter, 2 counts of second-degree murder, and 8 counts of cruelty to children. Chris Hosey is the director of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation.
These charges stem from Mr. Gray knowingly allowing his son to possess a weapon.
Gray and his son were interviewed by local law enforcement last year after the FBI received tips that the teenager had made threats online to commit a school shooting. His father told authorities his son did not have unsupervised access to hunting rifles kept at home. The GBI says the suspect killed 2 teachers and 2 students before surrendering to law enforcement. For NPR News, I'm Melissa Fato in Atlanta.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin is at Ramstein Air Force Base in Germany today. He's hosting the latest meeting of the contact group for Ukraine. He's been joined by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Austin says that Ukraine's recent offensive into Russia is forcing the Kremlin to shift its war priorities.
We're meeting at a dynamic moment. Ukraine continues to seize the initiative on the battlefield.
Austin has also announced that the Biden administration is offering Ukraine a fresh tranche of military aid. It's worth $250 million. The country's demographics continue to change, and they have reshaped the American political map. NPR's Domenico Montanaro explains how they could affect this presidential election.
Democrats used to have a strong appeal with blue-collar white voters, and that meant dominance for decades in the blue wall states of Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. Those voters shifted Republican in recent years, but the blue wall is changing. White non-college voters are on the decline there, and more white voters are acquiring college degrees. That's keeping Democrats competitive. It's a different story in the Sun Belt, though. Arizona, Nevada, North Carolina, and Georgia are diversifying quickly, largely because of the growth of Latino and Asian American voters, who are likely to be crucial this year. Domenico Montanaro, NPR News, Washington.
The Labor Department says 142,000 new jobs were created in August. That's fewer than forecasters had predicted. The unemployment rate fell to 4.2%. The weaker jobs report could influence Federal Reserve policymakers to consider interest rate cuts at their next meeting. That'll start September 17th. This is NPR.
It's now 4 minutes after 9. This is WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. The threat for excessive rainfall increases over our area. Meteorologist Megan Borowski from the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network says that a stalled front and developing low pressure are to blame.
Right, so we've had this stalled boundary over our area for the past few days, which has already created areas of flash flooding, and now low pressure that is developing along and over the Gulf is going to track eastward through our area over the next few days. We'll have rounds of downpours impacting the Panhandle and North Florida today through the weekend, and isolated accumulations up to a half a foot of rainfall is possible through early next week. Of course, with all this rain will come the risk of more widespread flooding.
And we are here in Northeast Florida under a flood watch for today and tonight. We've got lots of puddles and ponds of all sizes that have formed. And again, our flood watch in effect for today. Showers will continue Saturday. That's tomorrow at 70%, Sunday too at 70% chance of rain. Drivers can expect nighttime ramp closures Sunday through Thursday as part of a resurfacing project on I-10. That's between Chaffee Road and I-295. The southbound I-295 ramp to I-10 westbound is going to be closed Sunday through Tuesday. So will the westbound I-10 ramp to Hammond Boulevard, according to FDOT. And temperatures for today in the mid-80s, and for Saturday and Sunday, low to mid-80s around the area.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include EBSCO, offering EBSCO Learning, committed to enabling organizations and people seeking to advance their lives and careers to improve their skills and knowledge. Learn more at ebscolearning.com.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics today, a state employee is fired after exposing elaborate plans to remake state parks. A flood of newly registered Republicans could change Florida's status as a swing state. A developer wants to build on a disputed patch of land, and lawmakers consider Ghostbuster laws against phony candidates. To talk about all that and more, I'm joined by Nikesha Williams, author and producer of the Black and Published podcast. Welcome, Nikesha.
Hey, good morning. Good morning, Jacksonville.
Good morning to you, Noah Hertz, St. Johns County reporter at Jacksonville Today. How's it going, Noah?
It's going okay. How are you?
I'm great. John Daigle, former political reporter and longtime political consultant. Hey, John.
Hey, thanks, Ann, for the invite.
Welcome back to the country. And Tiffany Salameh, consumer investigative reporter at News4Jax. Hi, Tiffany.
Hey, good morning. Happy to be here.
Glad to have you. So, Noah, let's start with you on this first story. It's a story that you've actually been covering for a number of weeks now. It began with a plan to overhaul state parks. How did we get to this point where this whistleblower became involved?
So to kind of catch people up, I was on the show 2 weeks ago to talk about this. It was exactly 2 Fridays ago, and the drum that we were all banging was, look, if you have opinions about this, if you want the state to know how you're feeling about this project, go to these public meetings that they have planned next Tuesday all across the state about the projects. Well, at around 4:30 p.m. via Twitter, the DEP announced that they were rescheduling those meetings because there had been such overwhelming reaction to these plans that they wanted to be able to accommodate all the people to have it. Fast forward later the next week, and Governor DeSantis has announced that they're scuttling the entire thing. He says the thing was half-baked. He pretty much distanced himself from the projects as much as humanly possible. And the thing that DeSantis said during this completely unrelated press event where he was talking about the state park plan was that it was a half-baked plan that had been leaked out to what he said were left-wing outlets and left-wing groups, which the way it actually looks is that it was an employee. His name was James Gaddis, who worked at the DEP as a cartographer, who was part of the team that was tasked by the executive, by the governor's office to work on these plans. And he was just so bothered by them that he leaked the information to the press and the public, and specifically the Tampa Bay Times. So we're at a point now where this individual was fired. He was fired for behavior that was unbecoming of a state employee and all this stuff, and launched a GoFundMe. He said, look, guys, I'm looking for a new job. He's been calling himself an ethical whistleblower for sharing this information. And as of yesterday, when I checked, his salary at the DEP was around $50K a year, and his GoFundMe had brought in a little over $200,000. So he's going to be okay while he's looking for a new job. But that's where we're at with this right now.
Yeah, and Nikesha, to remind people, these were plans for a number of state parks, including one here in Northeast Florida, Anastasia Island. It would have involved at a bunch of them pickleball courts, some cases golf courses. The park here locally, a 350-room proposed lodge in the Anastasia State Park.
I just want to know, like, when did caring about the environment become like a left-wing thing? Especially in the state of Florida. Like, we herald ourselves as the Sunshine State. We have water on 3 sides of our state. We have beautiful state parks. And at a time where there is lots of development, lots of people moving to the state of Florida, some are actually moving for the natural world. So then the push to get people outside, I understand that, you want people to visit the state parks and increase the funding, but maybe don't entice them with attractions that they can find in their subdivision, right? Like, we're talking about pickleball courts and all these overnight lodging and accommodations. The reason some people want to go outside and go visit state parks is to take in the actual natural beauty of the preserved land. So then developing on it seems counterintuitive. And there is a way that you can promote tourism to state parks without encroaching on the natural life that is there that we actually need to prevent some of these climate and ecological changes that are coming in the coming years.
So, John, Gaddis, he was the cartographer that opposed and ultimately leaked these plans. He said this wasn't political. He said he was motivated to speak after what he saw was likely going to be vast environmental destruction at some of these state parks, and also secrecy, that he said that this plan was basically kind of cobbled together in just a couple of weeks and looked like it was going to be rushed through. But I mean, in Florida, everything's political, right?
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's the most interesting part of the story. And of course, I come from a political standpoint, but it's an amazing story. But in watching it, you saw signs of some Republican leaders in Tallahassee breaking with DeSantis. And to me, that was the interesting part, because it really showed the early signs of DeSantis being a lame duck. I mean, since he dropped out of the president's race and he can't run again, you wouldn't have, 2 years ago, you would never have seen leading Republicans from Tallahassee speaking out against a DeSantis plan. So that this story really showed signs that he's entering that lame duck period.
And Tiffany, the secrecy was one element that Gaddis said he objected to. But he also, as we said, said this was happening very quickly. And the timeline that he offered in his interviews said, it was like a couple of weeks. And anybody that's watched DEP knows that that is just an unbelievable pace. I mean, this is an agency that can take years to adopt a new rule or a regulation of some kind. There's, years of meetings. It's a pretty glacial pace typically.
Yeah, it makes you wonder too, if he did not leak it, how fast this would have happened, kind of under the curtain. And he was asked to make the maps, as you mentioned. And I mean, I think he said he was drawing the maps and seeing how much of the environment would be lost to these golf carts and courses, and he felt, an ethical need to come forward and talk about this. And it was amazing to see how many people were just in support of it across party lines, too, as you mentioned, John. And there is a difference, right, between passive recreation and active recreation, which is playing golf or pickleball, right? And I think that we have enough active recreation in Florida. You can go find a pickleball court here in San Marco pretty quickly, right? I don't think we're missing that here in the state.
It was interesting, Noah, because this whistleblower actually described himself shaking with anger. He said his hand was hovering over his computer mouse, and that he felt he was being told to rush these maps through. So what about whistleblower protections? I mean, you've looked into that. Some people have raised questions as to how can he be fired for blowing the whistle?
I was talking to some folks about this yesterday, and it seems like the jury's not 100%. This is a legal thing, so there's not going to be one concrete answer. But the one thing that I had heard was that in order to receive proper whistleblower protections through the state, there is still a track you have to follow, and one of those things is you need to properly complain about it. you need to complain about it through the correct avenues first, and then if those avenues fail, then you have the protections under statute to leak this information out. Another element of it, too, is that it is unclear at the moment. And, had this gone further, if this does go further, that will potentially play out more. But it's unclear whether or not anything that the state wanted to do was illegal. And so then it gets into an argument of, well, was the governor's office or the DEP conducting some degree of malfeasance with this project? And that's something that at the moment it's just kind of unclear. So
that chain of command issue, Nikesha, can be problematic if you're trying to complain about something, especially if something is moving quickly like this. But I would guess that if you complain and are fired, then the narrative becomes you're a disgruntled former employee of DEP as opposed to an active one that is, speaking out.
I mean, there's no right way to speak out against a government, one where you are politically aligned with them, and share some common ideals about something that goes against your moral and ethical code. So no, maybe this man didn't follow the rules the right way, right? But what he did was effective in getting the information out to the public so that the public could then decide. And we saw how quickly that the governor walked back the plan and then castigated it as something that was a boneheaded idea, even though it might have come directly from his office, right? So whether or not he gets whistleblower protection, that will be something for the courts to decide. But as Noah pointed out, that GoFundMe is sitting real pretty at about $200,000. So bruh man's gonna be all right.
Yeah, this guy's a single dad. But I mean, $200,000, he's gonna be okay for a bit.
230,000 so far.
Wow.
And their initial goal was just 10,000. So obviously exceeding that. John Daigle, there has been a push by a couple of lawmakers, including Angie Nixon here locally, to figure out kind of what transpired, how this happened. And they're beginning that process of trying to determine exactly who was in the loop and how something moved so quickly to try to prevent it from happening again.
And that's fairly predictable. I mean, Angie is wisely trying to make some hay out of this. Even though, as I noted, there is some break in the ranks among Republicans in Tallahassee, they still control what happens up there. And, aside from making some noise about it, I don't know that the Democrats are in a position to affect any major investigations or real changes. I mean, they'll make some headlines and they might even uncover some information. But in the long run, the story probably goes away and ends up being a black eye for DeSantis. And again, politically, it's one we'll probably see more examples over the next year and a half or so of Republican leadership in Tallahassee breaking ranks with the DeSantis administration and setting themselves up for the next governor's election.
Do you see it as having any animating effect on the people who participated in the protests? I mean, does anything like that create any momentum of its own?
It's hard to tell. I mean, I don't see this story as having legs going, months into the future. Again, those who have been against the DeSantis administration on a number of issues will continue to use this, but this continuing to be a story that will affect the next governor's race, I'm not sure it is that big of a story.
Yeah. Well, I want to move on now. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the week's biggest headlines with our panel of journalists and media experts, and you can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email comments or questions to First Coast Connect at wjct.org. You can also tag us on social media. And if you want to watch our live stream, it is live now on the WJCT YouTube page and Facebook. Tiffany, I want to move on now to a topic that you've been reporting on for a couple of weeks now. It is a controversial proposal to build 5 1,600 square foot row houses in Riverside. Explain to us why there's a controversy in the first place.
So if you're not familiar with this area in Riverside, right? You have the John Gorey condos directly to the left of this strip of grass. It is literally a strip of grass. And then you have a row of local businesses to the right. And then there's a small strip of parking, and Stockton Street is like a throughway. People use it to get to 95, and it can get really busy. Sometimes you'll be waiting to pull out of your parking space there, right? So I don't think you can really understand this problem until you go see it for yourself. Because you get there and you park. First of all, if you can parking is really hard. You have popular businesses there. I know the bicycle shop's super popular. There's a physical therapy office. There's Bold Bean. Of course, people love their coffee here. And then you're like, wait, where are these houses supposed to go? I mean, this was my thought process when I started reporting on this, and it is literally a strip of grass. I mean, I could probably lay my body over it twice, and it'd be over.
Yeah.
Yeah. I could just do a roll.
And so we haven't necessarily heard from the property owners, but it is a prominent family. Dolores Barr Weaver, was actually responsible for the renovation of the John Gorey, which was a school, and now is a very, I think, much architecturally acclaimed condo development. You know, it's a success of a redevelopment like that. But this property was in dispute because the maps changed, right? You've learned that there was a difference.
Yes.
Yeah.
So, right, we got this proposal that was sent to the Planning and Zoning Commission. We want to build these townhomes here, 5 of them, and we don't have plans for extra parking. So the question from residents and businesses is, how can you approve a plan without extra parking? And that was where all the controversy started. And then you start digging a little deeper and you find out, yes, this is the former owners of the Jaguars who are behind this proposal. So residents of the John Gorey condos are very upset about this, by the way, because they use that common area for, maybe they walk their dog there. Maybe they play a little soccer there with the kids. It's probably their only little piece of land that they have. And that is what a lawyer ended up pointing out to city attorneys. And what's important to understand about this is that this is a local attorney who just wrote this letter essentially for fun to the city, pointing out some discrepancies like, hey, John Gorey condos were finished in 2010, right? Their initial site plan surveys say that this strip of grass that they want to develop these 5 homes on was a common area for residents. Well, then in 2014, they changed those site plans and we're like, oops, that was a mistake. This is actually not a part of the John Gorey condos. So fast forward now 10 years later, and they have a proposal to build townhomes. The lawyer argues that this is pretty much similar to having a pool planned for like a neighborhood, right? You buy in this neighborhood, it's still developing, and one of the reasons you live there is because you want to use this pool, a community pool. Well, then 5 years later, the developer says, never mind, we're actually going to build more homes here. You're not going to have a pool. And that's what he kind of compares it to. I think that puts things into perspective really well, too.
Yeah, no, I think that it's that change that the lawyer is pointing out from what is a common property, a shared, amenity, essentially, of the condominiums to something that no longer is part of the condominiums. How does something like that kind of pass through the system in a way that it doesn't flag attention of the owners or the condo owners as in losing this amenity?
That's certainly a really good question, isn't it? I mean, I know I can speak. I shop at that bike shop, Zencog. I really like going to Bold Bean. I really like the record store that's right there. And I can certainly say that when I've pulled in and parked in those parking spots, I've seen the little orange sign and gone, oh, look, they're developing something here. I wonder what that is. But I mean, I know a lot of the reactions to this, and I hear this a lot when I follow developments too, especially down in St. John's where I follow a lot of the stuff. I think residents become really accustomed to things that are in their backyard, even if it's not land that is attached to their own land, and we are a very developer-friendly, very property rights-friendly state, and I think it can be a really hard thing for people to stomach sometimes to remember that just because you own land here or you rent here does not mean that you have any control of what the land and the lot next to you is like. Even if you enjoy it, you like your view, you like to walk your dog, it's not yours.
Yeah. And the obligation, obviously, there's no obligation to provide green space, Nikesha. In this case, maybe no obligation to provide parking.
I think, I can see this from two sides. As a homeowner, I greatly understand like the NIMBYism of them, the whole not in my backyard, where you get used to the way your neighborhood is laid out, the shops that you frequent, having the parking, having the freedom to walk your dog and have this green space, and the amenities that the neighborhood provides, which is what increases the value of that neighborhood and the attractiveness of living there. However, we must really reckon with the fact that we have a housing crisis in this country and in Jacksonville specifically. We have a shortage of affordable housing. You mentioned St. John's recently. There were 2 proposals in St. John's for affordable housing that were talked about this week that are not going to go through because there's not enough parking. But one of the comments was, affordable housing doesn't fit the lifestyle of St. Johns County because it's too expensive to live there. how discriminatory can you be? How classist and egregious can you be? And so the same thing we're seeing happening in Riverside with this development. I can understand why neighbors and homeowners and even people who rent in the neighborhood don't want these 5 row houses to be there to block whatever the sites they're going to see, to take up the green space that they've become accustomed to cause more traffic problems than what they're used to, even though I-95 is right there. So like you're always going to have traffic and it's always going to be an issue. We won't dwell, but let's talk about the fact that we need to have people who are going to need somewhere to live, especially when being unhoused is now illegal in the state of Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah. And John, I think one of the ironies of this project is that those row houses would go on this land, which is really the only vantage point to view the kind of this beautiful restored John Gorey School, which is a very attractive piece of that Stockton area. And it would basically be rendered almost invisible.
Yeah, I mean this isn't a story I've done a lot of research on, but there are some powerful forces in that area who are the landowners. They have great connections with City Hall now, and there's probably like with a lot of stories that involve land development and business. There's probably a lot more to it in terms of following the dollars than most people realize.
And Tiffany, what do we know about like what is going to happen next?
So we had public hearing this week, and lots of residents and business owners sounded off about how awful this is. And I understand the argument that we complain about affordable housing and there is no affordable housing. I have significant doubts that this would be affordable. You have 1,600 square foot homes. If they're anything like the John Gorey condos, which are beautiful, by the way, they're not really affordable. And it is beautiful, you're right, to look at. And these townhomes would block the view of the condos. So the city council will still have to approve this plan, right? And I did talk to the developer, John Gorey Investments. Once again, that is owned by the Weavers. And he mentioned to me that Dolores Weaver is really excited about this project and she wants to bring more homes to the neighborhood. And he essentially told me that if the housing proposal is not approved, then they will probably move forward again with like a commercial plan. So I don't know if either way we're going to have that green space in the future.
Yeah, property rights, as you say, Noah, are pretty strong in Florida. I mean, there's not a lot of wiggle room when somebody is asserting their right to develop to the highest and best use is kind of the standard.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I know this is something we're going to talk about too, about the elections and about some of the results of some of these elections. And I think no matter how much, it still remains to be seen what will happen. But again, St. John's, there's been a big groundswell of trying to get people elected who are going to push for less development, for slower growth. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see whether or not they are going to be able to withstand the state statutes that are in the way in a lot of cases of potentially preventing some of these bigger developments.
Yeah, and a lot of case law too. Well, let's move on. If you're just joining us, I am talking to John Daigle, Tiffany Salameh, Nikesha Williams, and Noah Hertz about the biggest headlines of the week. And you can join our conversation on air at 904-549-2937. You can also email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. I want to move on now to the topic of ghost candidates. Lawmakers have been looking at a way to kind of eliminate this spoiler system, makes voters ineligible to participate in certain races. So, John, remind us what a ghost candidate is and does, and that what this Santa Rosa lawmaker is wanting to do.
Yeah. So this is a very old strategy in Florida politics. It's completely legal and constitutional. It's a way of what they call closing a party primary, where you have if only one party enters candidates in a primary, then it becomes an open primary where independents who are growing rapidly in our system and members of the other party can also vote in that election. Most parties on both sides prefer to close those elections if they can, so that only members of their party can vote in that primary election. It's done a lot. We had tremendous, there's been examples all over the state. We had one of the most blatant examples here in our neighborhood in St. Johns County, and credit to Noah for doing some of the best reporting on what was going on. I've lived in St. Johns County for 25 years, and I've seen it many times. I'm an independent. many times, including this last election, there's almost nothing on my ballot because of this practice of closing these primaries in a heavily Republican county like St. John's, so that only Republicans get to vote on these. So there is an attempt. I'm skeptical of how far it'll go, but there is an attempt by a legislator to put an end to this practice. We'll see how far it goes.
And, parties want to close their primaries because they really are their election. The party primary is an opportunity for Democrats or Republicans to elect their choice candidate. And the problem becomes, John, when if it goes to November and there's no challenger, the race has been decided in the primary, and most people are not allowed to vote in
And
it.
the research shows that when this happens, I think I saw one article that said more than 2 million Floridians were essentially disenfranchised, like I was in that primary election, because we can't vote on either side because of these closed primaries that were done not by candidates who filed on either side. I mean, that's perfectly legitimate, but it's much more cynical, especially the way it was done in St. Johns County. Again, according to a lot of the reporting that NOAA did, it showed really cynical attempts by people who obviously had partisan motives to close these races. And again, the fastest growing voting bloc in America is independents, and this system makes it so that we don't get any say in who advances from the primary.
And I just want to be clear, when I said that most people couldn't participate, I'm kind of counting the fact that there are so many independents, and then the Democratic and Republican Party is fairly evenly split. So, but I want to ask you, Noah, because you have done really deep reporting into the issue of ghost candidates. Is it a particular problem in St. Johns County at this point, or is it just representative of the larger issue?
I would say both of those things are true. It is both a big problem in St. John's, but it is also something that we see a lot statewide. I did a lot of talking back and forth with the folks at the nonprofit Integrity Florida when I was doing my reporting, because this is something that they've been following for years. It's headed up by watchdogs who've been following this stuff for decades. And one of the things they told me was that they don't really see any push from the legislature getting particularly far with this, because St. John's is a really good example of what this looks like. It's also an extremely red county. And one of the things they said was that, both parties can take advantage of this process. And even if a lot of the high profile cases that we see are the Republican Party, it happens on both sides of the political aisle. But in St. John's especially, there were a lot of races that were completely closed off to a lot of people because of this stuff.
Yeah. And I mean, I was going to say it, and I agree with that. It's kind of like hoping for campaign finance reform. I mean, once the elected officials get into office using these tactics, it's very unlikely that they're going to mount a significant reform effort to change the system that helped them get into office.
So we should say that the ghost candidates are write-in candidates, essentially. And Nikesha, they're not required to pay qualifying fees or to get signatures in order to land on the ballot. Their name doesn't appear on the ballot. And so the chances that they're elected are virtually nil. One of the reforms, could be to require them to pay qualifying fees or require them to get signatures to be on the ballot. That could limit that tactic, but it's been proposed before and has not succeeded.
And it's not going to succeed. Disenfranchising voters is an American thing. It's just what we do. Both sides of the aisle, north, south, east, west, it doesn't matter. Disenfranchising voters is the way that you consolidate and maintain power. And so just as John said that, it's very unlikely when candidates who get into office using these tactics are going to then vote against their own political or power interests and call for reform, right? So we have to think about the ways in which we want our democracy at the local, state, and national levels to actually run, because the way it's been running and the way it is running now is to continually through legal measures, because this is a legal measure, to disenfranchise people that we want to keep away from voting against the current powerful and political interests, so that we can maintain and consolidate power and shape whatever city, state, county, or nation in the ways that we see fit. This is a problem that is old as American elections are, and it's not going away, and because people don't want to cede their own power.
Tiffany, one of the reforms that was proposed in 2018, the Constitutional Revision Commission, which kind of looks at our Constitution, decides if there's any changes that should be made. They considered it, and one of the things would have been, not that you can't close a primary if there are actual contenders. But if the only challenger is a write-in, their idea was it should be open primaries. But that never went before voters, and another effort in 2017 died in committee in the legislature without getting a single vote. So I think to John's point, maybe not a lot of optimism.
I don't think so. And, it would be great to see, because I did see a report that said, Florida was infested with these ghost candidates this year. And it's important to understand, like, they don't want to win the election. They just want to influence it, right? And so you'd think that we would pass some type of reform, to give the voters more power. But again, I do believe that this is working against voters' favors here. And write-in candidates also closed at least one local race in 20 counties across Florida. That was just this year. So I think that kind of puts things into perspective.
But on the good side, in those 3 races where you had ghost candidates for county commission in St. Johns County, 2 out of 3 of the candidates who were on the side that placed the ghost candidates in the race lost. So there's some room for optimism that strategy is beginning to have kickback and not be as effective as it once was.
I want to take a call from Taylor in the Beaches. Good morning, Taylor. Go ahead.
Hey, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hey, I've called in here numerous times and just hearing everybody talk about government corruption and either right or left, Republican, Democrat. I thought it was always the media's, and I am a lover of news and information to get out information about government corruption and holding them accountable. I'm a public official. I've called in numerous times to this program, dropped the information at y'all station about government corruption in this city. It's currently just got voted in again with the new mayor of, discriminating against people in their pensions who start at 18 years of age. And nobody's speaking about this. I can't for the life of me understand why. I'm a very concerned citizen and taxpayer.
Taylor, our call connection is not that great, but what specifically are you concerned about?
Well, currently there's numerous city governments in Duval County, and as far as I can tell, the pension program that was just passed by, Duval County, when you're discriminating against 18-year-olds in their benefits, i.e. people who start at 35, head management get special benefits, I don't see how that's not a reportable issue.
Thanks, Taylor. John, I've got to confess, I don't know what he's talking about.
I mean, there was a pension reform passed recently by the administration. I'm having trouble. It certainly did not. The plan did have disadvantages for some of the young 18-year-olds that he's talking about, but I'm not sure if that's, if I would consider that discrimination. I mean, certainly it wasn't the best plan for the young people coming in, but I would have to know a lot more about it before I, started thinking that even though it wasn't a great deal for the young pensioners, I'm not sure I would be able to label it a discrimination against them.
What was the goal of
again,
disincentivizing?
Yeah,
for
I mean,
the
I think, and again, I'd have to do some research, but in my recollection is that the new plan adopted allowed the older people who have been on the force longer to qualify for the traditional kind of pension plan that former firefighters and police officers had in past years, but it did exclude some employees, and I believe that included some of the newer employees joining the force. They had to get a certain amount of years on the force before they qualified for the traditional pension fund.
Gotcha. Thanks for the explainer. We've got a call from Zig in St. Augustine. Good morning. Go ahead.
Hi, good morning. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm driving. I just wanted to suggest that in thinking about these ghost candidacies, if candidates for a particular office or commission, et cetera, has a campaign established, that they have to ante up a certain amount of money at first. And if they use it, that's great. It would go towards their campaign. If they don't use it, they lose it. So if somebody just signs a form to get on the ballot but does no campaigning, they would lose whatever they would have to ante up. Say it's 10% of the average cost for whatever that particular office might be.
All right. Well, good suggestions. It's interesting. I mean, there are a lot of ways, I guess, that they could disincentivize people from just doing write-in candidacies, and qualifying fees might be the most baseline of that. Yeah. I want to move on and talk about increase in GOP registrations in the state. If you want to join our conversation, you can call us at 904-549-2937 or email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. Nikesha, Florida has long been regarded as a swing state. That could be changing. There are now 1 million more registered active Republican voters than Democrats.
Yeah, and so we've been looking at and parsing through the numbers, and basically what's happening is that the Republican Party has registered more voters, even when you account for people removed from voter rolls, when you account for people who may have switched parties because they wanted to vote in a close primary, all of that accounted for. The Republicans have a voter registration advantage. I think that goes back to 2020 and the pandemic, when Florida was one of the states that was open. And so we saw a lot of people moving to Florida to continue to run their businesses. And then the way that their political affiliations align fell more to the right of the aisle. With that said, we must also recognize that, again, disenfranchising voters is something that happens every election in the United States. And so there have been laws passed that have made it more difficult for particularly left-leaning nonprofit groups, that make it more difficult for them to register voters, the voters that they're seeking to reach, those who might be African American or Latinidad, or have some other background as that, who may be younger and have never voted before. And so registering through paper registrations may be more difficult. There's also the issue of online registrations or registering at the DMV. So reaching out to that target audience that the Democrats want to reach, those voters who may fly under the radar because of their youth, because they may not have proper license or identification or whatever the case may be, is going to make it more challenging. But I also think it's a population and a numbers game where Florida has increased in population, and that population has been overwhelmingly right-leaning.
Yeah. John, I want to ask you, because a lot of this depends on the definition of an active voter, and that is something that has to do with changes in the law. What is an active voter? What are the implications of being inactive?
Yeah, so I mean, the Florida GOP does get credit. They have built about a 1 million voter advantage, but it is more, as you pointed out, it's more complicated. Back in 2021, the Republicans in Tallahassee passed SB 90, which basically put into law that all absentee ballot requests that had not been used over a certain period of time got canceled, and those voters had to renew their registration or be put on an inactive voter list. That inactive voter list is heavily skewed towards Democrats, largely because in 2022, Governor DeSantis' race, he ran a very strong race. He won by historic numbers. A lot of Democrats sat out that race. And because they sat out and didn't vote and didn't renew their absentee ballot request, they got put on the inactive roll. The Democrats now are saying that the numbers that are showing that show the Republican advantage are really kind of deceptive, because they don't include the inactive, the many Democrats who are on that inactive roll, which of course the Democrats are now trying to get them reengaged. But they think that because of some of the recent law changes that make it harder to register voters, and as well as some of the reporting, that is the way things are being reported in Tallahassee, really skew the way this picture looks.
And we should be clear, just because you're designated an inactive voter doesn't mean you can't vote. It means that you have not participated.
Right.
But if you don't participate in 2 consecutive federal elections, you can be removed.
Yeah, that's my understanding. And again, a lot of it has to do with the mail-in ballots and the crackdown that occurred in that in 2021 and 2022. And again, the answer, of course, is for the Democrats to get out there and contact those inactive voters and get them, to renew their mail-in ballots. And there's good arguments on both sides as to why. But the Democrats do not see this 1 million voter advantage as clearly, as the Republicans are reporting it.
Yeah, and Tiffany, this is a change from Democrats, which just as recently as 4 years ago had a voter registration, a voter edge, I guess you would say, in terms of the number of registrants. And to Nikesha's point, the GOP is kind of calling this like a COVID-19 moment for the state. that there really was this impactful period where the governor was saying, the free state of Florida is openly inviting people in lockdown states to move here, businesses to relocate here. And there was this bump of about 700,000 people in 2022 moving to what was seen as a conservative haven.
It is so interesting. I could talk about this forever, by the way. It is. So I report in different neighborhoods every day, right? I meet so many people. There are so many neighborhoods where you can't find someone from Florida. It is, especially the new build neighborhoods. And I think I was in one neighborhood in St. Johns County where they called themselves a COVID-19 refugee camp. Like, actually, like this is how their homeowners associations refer to each other. And I'm like, wow, this is so interesting. Yeah. And I knocked on doors to talk to people about, an issue down there in St. Johns County. And it was like, okay, moved here from North Carolina, moved here from New York, moved here from California. And I do believe that is impacting things here. I mean, you see it firsthand when you go and talk to people. I think especially Noah in St. Johns County, it's crazy how many new people have moved down there, especially with it still developing too.
Yeah, the idea of political refugees is a really interesting concept,
Mhm.
But I want to take a quick call from Regina in Mandarin. Good morning, Regina. Go ahead.
Good morning, Ann. I just wanted to give you a big shout out and the guests. Wonderful topics, wonderful coverage. Two things. I agree with Nikesha, growing inequality. Number two, I wanted to give a public thank you to the whistleblower. And I wanted to encourage any other people that are having ethical dilemmas who would be whistleblowers. Perhaps if there was someone in Boeing who had blown a whistle, then the planes wouldn't have gone down and all the fiascos are going on. Thanks again and have a good weekend.
Thanks, Regina. Appreciate it. Certainly, if, as you say, Noah, there's now $230,000 in that GoFundMe. I mean, I wonder if that kind of reassurance would help tease out whistleblowers.
One thing I've been thinking a lot about is a couple weekends ago, right after I was on the show the last time, I went out to Anastasia State Park that morning, in part because I wanted an excuse to be able to, go to the beach and go on the little hiking trail and everything. But that was partly because I knew that there was an organized protest planned that morning. And, based on how little I had seen about this protest online, I was fully expecting 15 people with some cardboard signs. I walked out of the park around 10:30, around when the protest was starting, and there were hundreds of people along A1A. There were people with these fancy signs. There were people with big plastic letters on the side. There was a guy dressed as a crocodile, or an alligator, not a crocodile, good Lord, as an alligator. I was blown away by it, and I can't help but wonder, if we had known about the whistleblower, if James had showed up then, he would have been applauded as a folk hero.
Yes.
I want to just move on, and it's a difficult topic, John, but we only have a couple of minutes here. A sobering headline out of Georgia: a 14-year-old killed 2 classmates, 2 teachers, but his father was arrested and is now charged with manslaughter. This is a unusual case, but not unprecedented.
Yeah, and again, I'm looking at stuff from a political lens, which I typically do. Georgia is a very key swing state. Up until now, the issue of gun control had not been a major issue in the presidential election. It all of a sudden has become. I'm very curious to see how that issue plays in Georgia, whether it works. I honestly don't know whether the issue of gun control becoming a more major issue in the presidential election will help Republicans in Georgia or hurt them. It'll be interesting to see. But certainly, from my perspective, obviously it's a tragedy, and I feel terrible. But the major fallout now that the tragedy has occurred is going to be from my standpoint, what impact it has on raising that as a major issue with the debate next week, how gun control whether or not it becomes a major issue in the presidential race.
Where it wasn't at all before.
It was an issue, but not one of the top 3 or 4 major issues.
All right. Well, we're going to have to leave it there. John Daigle, Tiffany Salameh, Nikesha Williams, Noah Hertz.
Games Masters World Championship, October 5th and 6th at the Clay County Fairgrounds. 200 athletes from 9 countries compete to be world champions. The festival includes food, music, and merchandise. Tickets available at 2024mwc.com.
Wayne Hogan of the Terrell Hogan Personal Injury and Wrongful Death Law Firm. Serious injury cases are complex, and civil trial attorneys present the evidence juries need to see and hear. More at waynehogan.law.
On the next Florida Roundup, polls and politics. The election season is now in its last 2 months. Vote by mail ballots go out soon. Advertising will ramp up, and so will opinion polls. There'll be lots of polls and surveys trying to quantify what you think and why. Have you participated in a political poll? How do you judge the reliability of them? Email us radio@thefloridaroundup.org. I'm Tom Hudson. Then join us Friday noon until 1.
In celebration of the 25th anniversary of The Sopranos, HBO is premiering a new documentary about its landmark TV series. On the next Fresh Air, we feature archive interviews with David Chase, the show's creator, Michael Imperioli, who played Tony's impulsive nephew Christopher, and Lorraine Bracco, who played Tony's therapist. Join us
today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
Kamala Harris and Donald Trump agree to rules for their first and likely only TV debate. Weeks into their new school year, gun violence destroys more lives in Georgia. And in New York,
I know the crowd would want to see me and Francis, so we get an American in the final. So
Arthur Ashe Stadium takes center stage as two friends look to turn around a tennis trend. More on the Roundup next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, it's a play about the French Revolution's reign of terror, and it's a comedy. It's a tall order for a show that ends at the guillotine, but here to tell me how they do it is Jennifer Lilly. She's the actor playing Olympe de Gouges. Welcome.
That's right. Hi, thank you.
Did I do okay on the name?
You did great.
All right.
Perfect.
Katie Casey, the actor playing Marie Antoinette. Welcome, Casey.
Hello, welcome. Thank you.
And Aviana Singh, actor playing Marianne Angel.
Yes, thank you. Hi.
Hi. I want to ask you, Marianne, your character, this is a play that's based in the real historical, facts of the French Revolution. Your character, that was actually kind of a composite character of Haitian revolutionaries. Tell us a little bit about how you fit into this 4-character play.
Yeah, Marianne Angel, she's a very strong woman. She very much so, she embodies a lot of the people during this time. So it doesn't really seem out of place that she's not an actual person from that era, because she represents all the people from that time. So I really think she fits in very well with these women. And she shows what all of these people did during that time. So yeah.
I got to see this play a couple of years ago, and it is so funny and it's so compelling. But it's based in history. And Jen, was this history that you were familiar with when you embarked on this role, or were you finding yourself learning a lot about the French Revolution?
So I definitely had to do some research. I mean, I knew it's been a while since I've been in high school. I don't want to tell you exactly how long, but so I needed to brush up on my history, certainly. I was able to find, there's one biography of Olympe de Gouges written in English that I found. So I read that. I read her Declaration of the Rights of Women and the Female Citizen. So we definitely did our research
She was a playwright, and she also was like a feminist. Is that?
She was an activist and abolitionist. She was ahead of her time. I mean, she was very wild and spicy, Olympe. So yeah, she was very fun to learn about, and even more fun to play.
Yeah, and so your character actually writes to Marie Antoinette. That is the character that you play, Katie. And it is a fun character to play. Not so fun in maybe real life, but in the character, the way that this playwright has written your character. Tell us a little bit about your Marie Antoinette.
She is hilarious. She has all these great one-liners, and she's just written in a way that is very truthful, and in that she brings hilarity. I mean, we just have so much fun playing off each other, and Marie just ties it all together.
Yeah, and she is kind of this like mocking, easily, I guess, mocked character, sort of, a joke. But part of
she's
this,
aware of it.
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
so
kind of embraces it, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so this play, as we say, is kind of historical fact and then also some fiction. It's a play that begins like a comedy and ends like a drama. That's like actually a line in the play.
It is, yeah.
Like life, they say. And so how do you maintain the comic tone? Because there's a lot of like guillotine here, as we mentioned.
I mean, I can certainly take that. I mean, we think we're hilarious. First of all, let me just say that we crack
For
ourselves
sure.
up every night. No, the play is so brilliantly written. I mean, you've seen the show, so you know it's so brilliantly written, and it is heavy material, which is why I think the fact that it's a comedy is so perfect because you're delivering some pretty heavy stuff to people, but we do it in kind of an easily digestible way, and it is just it's really funny. I mean, Marie's a hoot as we've established, but there are just funny moments with every single woman and the relationships they have with each other. So yeah, we're delivering heavy stuff, but boy, is it funny.
Yeah. And also the play has got just a lot of interaction. You know, these women have this relationship that they build among themselves. Do you have like a favorite moment for your character or in the play as a whole? I mean, just something that sticks with you.
Definitely a favorite moment for me would be when a lump and I are going back and forth. I feel like any moment where a lump and I are going back and forth is really a memorable moment, but especially around the end when we start to like come together again after all the stuff that's happened throughout the play, all the tragedy that's happened. And we're just having that moment where we're looking out like, I'm scared, but we can be scared together and we're going to fight through this together and we're going to come together and we're going to do this.
Yeah. It is an extraordinary play. It opens, I guess, next Friday on September 13th. This is at Players by the Sea. We should note that that is an all-volunteer project, so everybody from the cast to the people backstage are all volunteers on that crew, but it's a great enterprise. So thanks for coming along and sharing this story. We look forward to the performance.
Yay, come see us.
Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. And that's our program. If you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock on WJCT. You can also find our entire archive on your favorite podcast platform. Don't forget to listen Saturday at 4 when neurologist Dr. Joe Servin explores the history of autism and the stigma surrounding this disorder on his weekly show, What's Health Got to Do with It? Join us Monday when we learn about the legendary Jacksonville baseball manager who survived one of the deadliest accidents in sports history. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
And the North Florida TPO.
Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com.
North Florida TPO, proud sponsor of WJCT's First Coast Connect, bringing to the community innovation in transportation planning, commuter services, clean fuels, and intelligent transportation systems. More at northfloridatpo.com.
Congaree & Penn, dedicated to agriculture and culinary endeavors, offering field-to-fork dining and outdoor experiences on over 300 acres. Sip, dine, explore. Information at congareeandpenn.com.